The following WCIA3 special presentation is sponsored by I&B, Inman Place, and University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Now from WCIA3 News, Central Illinois Hidden History, honoring Black history.
Good evening. Welcome to Central Illinois Hidden History. I'm Paul Cicchini.
And I'm Jennifer Roscoe. Tonight we are once again taking a look at some events in Black history rarely talked about, which impacted our lives here. We're
standing at the Bruce D. Nesbitt African American Cultural Center on the U of I campus.
This new building opened less than a year ago here in Urbana. It's a place that provides a network of programs and support services for Illinois' Black students, faculty, staff, and alumni.
African Americans have made great contributions to our country for centuries. Some of the names we know, others we don't, but are very much part of our history, whether we know it or not.
Coming up, we're going to look at some of Black history's hidden moments, the ones not talked about as much, but still with lasting effect on generations to follow.
Many communities put together annual events to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
But not all of them have the magnitude of the program in Champaign County. As Aaron Eads shows us, this event boasts an impressive history of speakers.
Every year, the Champaign Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. countywide celebration has been a gathering for reflection.
It's not about the color of your skin, but the content of your character.
Prayer and fun.
It has almost survived 2 decades. That's pretty special.
Vasilia Clark is one of the organizers. She works for the city of Urbana, just one of several entities that come together every year to make the program possible.
Everybody was doing their own thing. And someone made the suggestion, wouldn't it be nice if all of you guys came together and did one big program?
And they quickly discovered there were benefits to that.
We hoped that we would be able to bring the kind of speakers to the community that would really spark an interest. We've had Ernest Green, who was one of the Little Rock Nine. We've had Linda Brown, who Brown versus Board of Education.
Bishop Kenneth Ulmer.
Unity means let's agree that we can't handle this alone. Let's agree to put this in hands that are bigger than ours.
Former Chicago Bulls player and speaker Bob Love.
Every person that I know of that has accomplished anything in life, ladies and gentlemen, it all started out with a dream, with the dream.
In 2004, they also hosted an Illinois state senator most of the country hadn't heard of yet.
The greatest challenge for a King Day speaker was convincing his or her audience that Dr. King's message spoke to the president, that his dream, in fact, had not yet been achieved.
And many more.
Bringing in folks that are continuing the work or that was a part of that work. It just reminds me of our individual responsibility as human beings, that we have a duty and a responsibility to make things better for those that may not be as fortunate as you and I are.
They've built a collection of keynote speakers who carry on Dr. King's legacy by standing on the shoulders of one of the greatest keynote speeches of all time.
We still have a long way to go as it relates to social justice and how our communities really sort of change and the impact that we have. So we need to continue to remember his dream and what we can do. Even though he's not here anymore, we have to really keep his dream alive, be inspired, and make sure that we have an impact every single day in our communities.
The event takes up to a year to plan. Because of the work involved, each community that participates takes turns putting the program together.
Coming up next.
So this is not a celebration, this is a commemoration.
It's been 400 years since a ship landed on these shores filled with slaves. How discrimination and oppression turned into hope and perseverance.
Christopher Columbus likely transported the first Africans to the Americas in the late 1490s on his expeditions to Hispaniola, now part of the Dominican Republic. Their exact status, whether free or enslaved, remains disputed.
As for those known to be enslaved, it was August of 1619. An English ship sailed into the James River in Virginia. What was aboard changed the face of history. Kara Dixon has the story.
Can you imagine 400 years ago being captured from Ndongo, Angola, and be placed aboard a slave ship, not knowing where your destination would be?
1619, the year the White Lion sailed across the Atlantic and docked on these shores.
Arrived right here at Point Comfort. Today is Fort Monroe.
Now stands a historical marker in the place where Calvin Pearson looks out at the waters, where around 20 Africans were brought here against their will.
What was going through their minds, arriving at a location they didn't know where they were, arriving at a destination where they didn't know what their future would be?
That future would be marred with stories of discrimination and oppression for centuries through slavery and Jim Crow laws. But it was also filled with hope and perseverance through the Civil Rights Movement and the election of President Barack Obama.
400 years of history, 400 years of inventions, 400 years of achievement. So this is not a celebration, this is a commemoration.
To do that, Fort Monroe will hold programs and ceremonies throughout the year. It's something Park Superintendent Terry Brown says everyone should experience.
Yes, it's been a tough journey, but I want them to walk away with a sense of, wow, look how far we've come.
A long way from being dragged on shore, shackled in chains.
It's not just a black story or African-American story, it's an American story. It truly is.
It's a story that needs to be told. It's a story that we should not be ashamed of, but it's a story that our ancestors, our descendants, it's a story that everybody should understand and recognize that the transgressions of one people among another people is something that should never be repeated.
Two of the Africans who arrived aboard the White Lion, Antonio and Isabella, became servants of Captain William Tucker, commander of Point Comfort. Their son William is the first known African child to have been born in America, and under the law of the time, he was born a free man.
Coming up next,
racial injustice just comes to life.
The country's best college football player feels it firsthand. How a broken jaw and jeering fans couldn't stop this bright star from changing the game for the better.
The journey that changed football forever started with an African-American player from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Johnny Bright was his name, and he endured brutal racist attacks on the field that would end up securing protection for generations of future athletes. Kai Torquay has the story.
A gridiron in Oklahoma, 1951.
It's like the racial injustice just comes to life.
A battleground that still haunts Deanie Bright Johnson nearly 70 years later. Nightmares of her dad, the best college football player in the country, with a broken jaw and zero sympathy from the stands.
People just, oh, that's the way it is, that's the way we play football. I mean, that's a terrible, terrible situation.
Johnny Bright, Drake University superstar,
Johnny Bright explodes into the end zone.
Had been the first black player ever to step in this stadium. On this visit, opponent Wilbanks Smith wanted to make sure he'd never come back.
I was in the press box at the time. In 2 or 3 plays, I said, boy, they're really getting after John, you know.
He was watching his teammate run the ball, so he let his guards down just for a moment.
Then, a devastating blow to his exposed, unprotected face. Moments later, a second strike, and then a third. But before his team carried his limp body off the field, he launched a statement 61-yard touchdown pass, ready to be the face that changed the safety of the game forever.
The best way to retaliate is to be great. And that's a page that you could take from Johnny Bright.
Johnny Bright's legend took off in Fort Wayne, Indiana, from Central High School phenom all the way to the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. Schools, awards, and stadiums inspired by his name.
My dad would say football, sports is the vehicle. His love and his passion was educating people.
And her dad comes through for all of us. Every time we see a football helmet, right after the attacks on him in Oklahoma, a national conversation on player safety fired up. The NCAA would soon require all players in the league to wear face masks. As the discussion grew, the NFL would make the same requirement several years later, making Bright's impact on this global game undeniable.
Bright runs wild for the goal line, and the Eskimos are back in the lead.
What would your dad say if he could see all the players wearing face masks today?
He would say it's absolutely amazing. He'd probably have tears in his eyes and say, you know what, we've really come a long way.
Oklahoma State University gave the Bright family a formal apology 2 decades after he died, almost 55 years after the incident.
Coming up.
There are people in Springfield who call me Harriet Tubman.
And why not? She's been playing the conductor of the Underground Railroad for almost 3 decades. Why she's also known as Illinois' First Lady of History.
Many people associate Springfield with President Abraham Lincoln, but few people know about the faces who helped preserve Lincoln's history.
Even fewer people know about the pivotal role one black woman in Central Illinois plays to make it all possible. Gabrielle Franklin introduces us to the woman known as Illinois' First Lady of History.
I was born in 1947, so I'm 72 years young and proud of it.
When you ask people in the community about Katherine Harris, they have a lot of things to say.
She is a walking dictionary, historian. She knows where everything is, and we need her. We depend on her. She's always there.
Harris is a longtime librarian and historian who was the first black woman to serve as president of the Abraham Lincoln Association, the first director of library services at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, and a board member of the Central Illinois African American History Museum. Although she's known for her historical expertise, Harris says she almost went down a different path in life.
My sorority sister lived in Champaign-Urbana. She said, Katherine, you always like libraries. Why don't you apply to go to library school? I applied to go to the University of Illinois Library School on a whim almost. And lo and behold, I got accepted.
The Carbondale native pushed through the challenges of being a young single mother and graduated before landing a job at the public library in Springfield.
I was the first African American librarian with a degree. There were other black folks on the staff, but they did not, when I started, have a degree. And I worked in the reference room, in the reference department, and that's where I went. That's where I met my husband.
Her late husband was an abuse and addiction counselor who eventually started the first program here in Springfield. They moved to Florida for 7 years, where she worked as a librarian at Florida International University. When they moved back to Springfield, she took on a role that many still know her for to this day.
Probably 26 years ago, when I worked for Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, and she was performing Harriet Tubman. And at the end, she always would do a Q&A. And after it was over, I said, you know, Katherine, you should do your Q&A as Harriet. Don't just be Katherine, do it as Harriet. And she just thought, oh, I don't know if I could do that. And of course she could. And so that's when she started really doing that kind of conversations with the audience.
Over the years, it's just kind of evolved. And so now there are people in Springfield who call me Harriet Tubman. And I will answer to that.
I just love her passion and her energy, especially when she gets into her role of Harriet Tubman or teaching about history. You can see that true passion come to fruition, and how she shares that with others, especially our young people, our children. That's what it's all about, because it's important for us to always remember our history, and Catherine makes a great point of doing that, but makes it fun in the process.
Last fall, Governor Pritzker appointed Harris to the Presidential Library and Museums Board as an expert for the state, and many say they couldn't think of a better person for the role.
Usually people judge communities based on the people that come from there, so she's a great one to go out and just be yourself and be passionate, and she's a great representation of Springfield, as importantly as being the capital city and Abraham Lincoln's home.
Those who know Harris say Illinois' history has a better future because of the work she's done.
Coming up next.
Essentially, they were serving as some of the first park rangers anywhere in the world.
It was a group of Civil War veterans who were sent out west. How these so-called Buffalo Soldiers led the groundwork for what millions of us enjoyed today. The concepts of protecting and conserving the environment are commonplace now, but it was groundwork done by African American soldiers in the 1800s that ensured national parks are here for us to enjoy.
Tonight, we shine the spotlight on one of the most famous landmarks in the country. Anthony Bailey reveals the hidden history of one of those parks, Yosemite.
Our national parks are home to some of the most iconic views in the world.
When you look across here, you're seeing the South Fork of the Merced River. You're seeing the varying coniferous trees that we have here and deciduous trees.
National Park Ranger Shelton Johnson teaches visitors about Yosemite. Among the reenactments and talks he presents is the story of a group of African American troops called the Buffalo Soldiers. Their name given by Native American fighters who harken their hair to the crown of a buffalo.
If you could bring those soldiers back and put them right here again, it wouldn't look that much different than what they experienced themselves.
In 1866, the Army sent the group, which included Civil War veterans and other soldiers, to the wilderness we know as Wawona. The group was comprised of the 9th and 10th Cavalry and the 24th and 25th Infantry.
So roads had to be built, hotels were built, lodging of various sorts were built, and they were all built for the convenience of visitors.
For the next several summers, a few hundred soldiers would camp in a tent city at the headquarters located in the A Loop of the Wawona campground.
Essentially, they were serving as some of the first park rangers anywhere in the world.
National parks were a new idea. Poaching and timber thieves were new to families accustomed to exploration and life in the Wild West.
So basically, they were providing a presence of discipline, a presence of authority, so that people knew that the park was under the command of these forces.
The national parks and park rangers would not be established until years later in 1916. The Buffalo Soldiers also left their mark in the area of conservation.
And on those slopes behind me, the Buffalo Soldiers actually built in 1904 an arboretum.
It is believed to be the first museum in the national park system. Although some contributions are gone, Ranger Johnson says that other connections are still very present.
The hat that I'm wearing on my head right now derives from the cavalry hats that were worn by U.S. Army troops both in Yosemite, Sequoia, and Yellowstone.
That history of the African American contribution to the national parks is what Johnson is working to keep alive and inspire others.
We didn't just come along after this was set up. We were part of the setting up. We were part of the building of this idea.
Buffalo Soldiers had the lowest military desertion and court-martial rates of their time. Many won the Congressional Medal of Honor, an award presented in recognition of combat valor that goes above and beyond the call of duty. There are so many stories out there, we only have the time to highlight a few.
More hidden history moments that are lying right in your backyard. I'm Jennifer Roscoe.
And I'm Paul Cicchini. Thanks for joining us.
This has been Central Illinois Hidden History, honoring Black history. A WCIA3 special presentation, sponsored by INB, Inman Place, and University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign.